Okay, welcome back. You're at the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit this Thursday, whichever state, country, or continent you're joining in from. Welcome. This is day 3 of the summit. I'm Bianca, and I'm the host for this panel. I'm essentially a communications and marketing professional, an equality warrior, and primarily with a career in journalism and digital comms and storytelling. But in my day job, I serve as the chief storyteller and head of CEO communications for a technology services firm called Wipro. I also serve on the Diversity Council. But enough about me. I'm really, really excited to introduce 3 wonderful human beings, very knowledgeable in their own spheres, very sought after for their leadership and their insights. So quick round of introductions, which I know is possibly not going to do justice to their long-standing careers. But here goes, in no specific order, of course. Jacqueline Baker, she's a leading consultant in the areas of etiquette and protocol, and as an extension, she founded Scarlet Communications. She's also an author. 2017 is when I think she published a book called Leader by Mistake, quite an intriguing title there. Jacqueline, very pleased to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So excited to offer some insights today.
Lovely to have you. All right, we'll move on to our next speaker for the day. That's Rachel Hyam. She's Global Chief Information Officer with the creative powerhouse WPP. Rachel has held various leadership positions in technology with companies like BT, Vodafone, and in 2019 or 2018, she was named as one of the 50 most inspirational champions of future female leaders in global business by the Financial Times. And she's been a passionate women in tech champion that I've had the opportunity to work with briefly. Rachel, lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you, Bianca, and thank you for having me. I'm excited about the conversation ahead.
Absolutely, likewise. And now to my absolutely charismatic final guest for the panel, Paolo Nagari. Paolo, he is a cross-cultural consultant for corporations like IKEA, like GE, the luxury brands Zegna, etc. And he's also the founder of Intercultural Group, which has developed this unique intelligence model that helps companies and managers sort of train for multicultural, multinational teams. Welcome, Paolo.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to share some actionable advice.
Lovely. And I think Paolo and Jacqueline, they're joining us from the US, Rachel from UK, and I'm in India. So it's a lovely global cohort here, which is great. All right, so just kicking off the conversation, I want to, so this session is titled Lost in Translation, How to Lead Diverse and Inclusive Teams. And I obviously couldn't have thought of a better speaker set. So great job there, the Non-Obvious Company team, and great summit so far from what I've seen. So we want to spend the next 40 odd minutes discussing how to encourage collaboration and to sort of build respect, build a sense of belonging within teams who don't look like each other, who are essentially different from different cultures and backgrounds. And obviously the whole point is that all of us, we can go back to our own ecosystems with some lessons and learnings and ideas. So let me start off with a round of opening comments from each of you, maybe 2 to 3 odd minutes, on how you're navigating this complex diversity dynamics that now exists, and that's essentially been precipitated by the COVID-19 crisis. So, Paolo, let me start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, the interesting thing is that normally we tend to think in the context of the pandemic of how the work has shifted toward remote. And that is already challenging sometimes. And in my work, I see an extra layer of complexity that comes from the fact that many people involved in the teams I see are from different cultures, which means they come from a different background and they have different value sets. So that kind of adds up on the complexity, but there are ways to go about it. And today I'm excited to share some ideas, very actionable ones. But in essence, there's nothing to fear, nothing to be afraid of. This is actually potentially a very amazing opportunity, as we know for a fact that multicultural teams actually outperform monocultural teams very easily. So I'm looking forward to share more about this.
I love that optimism, right? Nothing to be afraid of. Rachel, quick comments from you. I think we kind of find ourselves in this rather unique setup today, right? Everybody's in a remote work setup, and especially for managers who are managing large teams like you.
Absolutely, and it's been particularly interesting because I only joined WPP 2 months ago, obviously in the middle of the pandemic. So during the pandemic, I've been interviewed, hired, and have joined a new organisation that is probably the most global organisation I've worked at. I have members of my team in Nepal, in Mongolia, in Chile, in every corner of the world. And so connecting with them quickly over the last 2 months has been an interesting challenge. I think in the world of remote working, everything we were doing as organisations to improve diversity and inclusion has become harder. We have to move our previous interventions to a digital format. Sometimes that does work and sometimes it's challenging. We have to try and offset the loss of in-person social support networks with virtual interactions. And again, doesn't quite have the quality of social networking that you're used to. We're having to teach people how to run inclusive virtual meetings and events. That's an interesting new skill people are having to acquire. And we're having to teach our people leaders how to cope with the new inequalities that are appearing across our workforce and our customer base. We're seeing a lack of Wi-Fi bandwidth being a new inequality, a lack of a quiet, well-equipped desk environment being an inequality. We're seeing women taking on more of the homeschooling and caring challenge that the pandemic has caused around the world. So as organisations, we're having to lean in and help solve for those. And as I look across peer organisations, I'm seeing some of them disappointingly start to deprioritise investment and focus on diversity and inclusion because it is being harder during this time when we're all remote working. But for me, now is the time to actually double and triple our investment and focus in this area more than ever. So that would be my appeal to the audience today.
And perhaps something that you'd mentioned earlier, which was about connecting. That's something we want to go back to a little bit more. Jacqueline, let me get your thoughts in here, because there are quite a few ideas already that I want to then stitch together.
Sure. There are a couple things that come to mind for me when I think about this question. One is this idea of individual leadership. I have a number of people that are on my team and a number of different personalities. We often charismatically refer to each other as characters. And especially during a time like this and a time like 2020, when things were really rocky and we were unsure what day-to-day looked like, and layer on top of that, this concerted effort to make sure that diversity is at the forefront, it is making sure that I am being available and I lean into the style that is necessary to make sure that the team and my team individually is supported. And so it's not leading people at this macro level where I'm treating everyone exactly the same, but figuring out in times of turmoil and despair, how can I be a little bit more individualistic to the people that I lead? The other thing, and I'm sure that everyone here in this conversation can relate to this, is that, we attend a lot of conferences and go to a lot of events, and sometimes in titles or in as it relates to subjects that we feel like we know this, like I am the expert in this. But what tends to happen sometimes when we forget to turn off that expert mind is that we sit there and then we're not listening to exactly what's going on. We think I already know this. And every time that I humble myself and say, Jacqueline, you're sitting in another leadership conference, leadership and etiquette like the back of your hand, but instead just sit and absorb, I learn even more. And I say that particularly as it relates to this conversation, in the capacity of ERGs, right? We think sometimes, many people think that I'm not going to go to a particular ERG that doesn't have anything to do with my ethnicity or my racial makeup because I can't relate. But when we actually humble ourselves and sit in ERGs that don't have anything to do with me as a Black woman, perhaps I'll sit in a Pacific Islander ERG and learn the things that I should and shouldn't be saying, the ways that I should and shouldn't be communicating. And so I really encourage the audience to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about that. How can I get uncomfortable so that I make my relationships and the conversations that I'm having in the workplace and even personally a lot more easier to digest and respectable as well?
Yeah, indeed. And then you talked about humility, which really kind of, stayed with me, because I think that's such an indispensable skill that possibly separates the leaders from the followers. But let me, we prepped a little bit for the topics that we want to touch upon. And one of the things I wanted to go back to, harking to the point that Rachel made about how she was, hired and she was inducted into a global organization in the middle of a pandemic, completely remotely. So going back and falling back on technology, right? So I want to combine technology and culture a little bit and understand how we can build a data-informed, a fair and equitable culture. And Rachel, because you're a technologist, tell us a little bit about, is there a way to crack this fragmentation, this discomfort, this downright unfair experiences of people using technology and using data insights?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to go to the data first and foremost, collect and share the data and metrics that baseline your culture today and show and surface the gaps that you have. But then one powerful way I've found to help that be consumable is actually turn that into various visualizations, whether it's imagery or graphical visualizations, to help tell the story behind that data. Tell the story of where you are today, why it's not getting any better, and create that collective case for change and establish the ambition for closing down the gaps. Once I've done that, it really is about then getting senior leadership buy-in to invest in the skills, the capabilities, the partnerships, the interventions you need to take meaningful action to close the gaps, to remove the biases. And it's really important as you do that you clearly designate accountabilities around reducing the gaps that you see, and you tie your compensation mechanisms to that. People will take action where they're motivated through compensation more often than not. You then have to layer in a focus on closing the gaps and achieving equity across all dimensions into your culture. Once that's there, you can then publicly recognize those that are living up to those cultural values and outcomes, and start to build a strong community that sustains that going forward.
Yes, and I'm assuming that, and I'm an optimist, so I believe that technology is it's not perfect, yes, but it's also improving and maturing very quickly. So perhaps more and more biases are being recognized and eliminated with every new iteration. And I also believe that maybe new technology-assisted workplace that can possibly sort of be quicker to expose these unconscious biases that you talked about. Paolo, if I can come to you, I'm interested in cross-cultural intelligence, something that you and your team have sort of found a way to harness for the intelligence model. So I'd love to know a little bit more about, what do you look for? What is the process? And then when you have that intelligence, how do you sort of use that to help companies do business in multinational, multicultural setups?
Absolutely. So listen, the model I developed, which I call the intercultural intelligence model, is based on principles that apply and are effective universally. And so, for example, let me actually share an actionable exercise that anyone can do in any team, whether it's the team that is starting today or that they have been together for a while. Normally I encourage teams to actually have this activity where they ask each other, assuming, like we said, that they are from different countries and different cultural backgrounds, to mention one do and one don't about their culture. So let's imagine, in this case, I would ask you, Bianca, one do and one don't about the Indian culture. What does that mean? Essentially, I'm asking, what can I do or say that would help me to connect with the Indian culture better and faster?
Or that's acceptable in the Indian culture.
Excuse me?
Or that's acceptable in the Indian culture.
Exactly. Another way to pose the question is, what are the typical mistakes that foreigners make when they come to your country?
Right.
And it's just the other way around when it comes to the don'ts. But one thing that, I can do and say to connect, and one thing that I can do or say that I shouldn't do or say. And this is a very interesting thing, because as you do this, the contributors, the team members are starting to share their experiences and really their culture. So they feel completely engaged in sharing that with the others. It's very, very, very rare to see somebody who's not excited about sharing their own culture. And then you collect these items, and the sharing of these items is already a common ground. The members are starting to learn about the other cultures. They're starting to be surprised, maybe a little shocked. It doesn't matter. This is a process where they actually get acquainted and kind of make peace with these differences that are emerging. But the activity has a second step, like a second part that makes it all work together. And as normally, I encourage the team to work on this question. Okay, now that you know the do's and don'ts, which really represent the differences, what makes your people, what makes your culture the same as any other culture in the world? So essentially, I'm asking for similarities. And you will see how beautifully, people start to think of very deep concepts like, okay, well, but they're also simple because they are universal. Such thing like, okay, everyone anywhere in the world would want to be respected. Anyone anywhere in the world enjoys breaking bread with others to establish rapport, and the list is long, but there. With these similarities, you start to realize that can be the platform on which you can build the trust and rapport. And so essentially, going back to the intercultural intelligence model, principle number 1 says, focus on similarities, not on differences. And this is so simple, but really not always easy to do. It does take a little bit of retraining our mind. We tend to be more focusing on the differences. It's easier. The differences are mostly more obvious, more to the surface. But really what matters is behind. And we can definitely harness the power of these similarities to create a connection, to create a platform on which you can build that amazing team that you have.
Let me bring in Jacqueline as well into this, because she's got a lot of experience, being an etiquette and protocol coach. Jacqueline, I've worked in many companies in the past where I've sort of seen that consistently and very imperceptibly, there's this erosion of what we call as intellectual bravery, right? Teams in which our colleagues are not just willing to, but encouraged to disagree, to dissent, to even challenge the status quo. And, even to the point where there is a risk of embarrassment, possibly. And so as a leader, we have to provide that psychological safety to our teams so that they're able to display that courage. So what role do you think etiquette plays in creating this type of open culture?
Sure. I must take this opportunity to say that I know that the word etiquette often gets a bad rap, right? Because etiquette is often associated with perfection and doing things exactly right. I know how it is. And I've worked over the past 10 years to try really hard to make sure that people understand what etiquette is. The definition of etiquette is just the accepted code of behavior for particular situations. That's all that it is. And it's with the caveat that those particular situations sometimes change. I mean, there was a time, for example, that African-American women couldn't wear their natural hair at work and be taken seriously, right? That's a code of behavior and an action that's just changed over time. But what I will say, and what I'm very much looking forward to, I'm looking forward to all of us falling in love with or introducing and making ourselves comfortable with this simple statement. And it's that I don't know. A lot of times the reason why we jump off this cliff or we end up in a bad place is because we made some assumptions about another culture or about another team member, or about how we think things should go or how someone should respond, when in fact sometimes just saying, this scenario that just came up, I'm not exactly sure how you want to be addressed. I mean, for me, even personally, I had to learn a totally different set of titles, how people like to be referred to and referenced, and things that 10 years ago weren't things that I had to educate myself around. And so, Bianca, in summary here, what I do look forward to is leaders especially paving the way and bring a good role model for sometimes saying, I don't know the answer to this. I'm not really sure how to address you in this scenario. Oh, I apologize. I didn't mean to mispronounce your name in that way, or, you know, to refer to you in that manner. Please help me. Can you educate me? Can you teach me? One of my core lines a lot of times is, can you teach me how to do this? Can you educate me? Can you bring me up to speed? Because I really don't know. And really in a way that is, once again, humbling myself and really creating this this leadership path and this environment of learning and connecting. And so that's what I would lend there, Bianca.
So essentially, I hear vulnerability, and going back to a point that was made earlier about humility and how you tie that to sort of encourage this courage, this intellectual bravery in your teams, right?
Absolutely. And in addition to that, I will add as well, it is also, I love that you brought up psychological safety just a bit ago, because, you know, I think that a big mistake that I've seen leaders and colleagues and even friends of mine who are in a space of leadership and influence to just pretend that things were going the way that they've always gone, right? Last year was everything but normal. And in times when a scenario is not normal, when a situation is stressful, when we are going through change, it's important to create just awareness. To be honest, this isn't a normal situation right now. What do you all need? What do we all need to feel safe? What do you need in order to share? Do you need some additional support? I think also just, you know, tapping into that and making sure that you're creating a safe space for your team is also very important as well.
I just muted myself. Let me bring in Rachel here, and please, you know, if any of you have a point of view or a counterpoint to make, just, you know, feel free to jump in. Rachel, you've got a lot of experience across various industries, various sectors, various roles, and perhaps you have. I mean, I for sure have, you know, experienced in the past organizations that develop these patterns of willful blindness, if you will, you know, bureaucracy burying boldness, efficiency sort of crushing creativity. And from there, obviously, all of these status quo, they sort of solidify and calcify. So the responsibility of changing that obviously lies with leadership. Your thoughts on, you know, how to reverse this play, right? And maybe from your examples at WPP or previous organizations that you've worked at, and you've led that change from the front, sort of weaving in, you know, this new change or new face of leadership in the face of this pandemic and thereafter.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I mean, for me, the pandemic has definitely underscored the growing importance of building trust between leaders and their teams, and also trust within teams. And you know, trust can be built, I think, more equitably if you have greater diversity in the teams, and if leaders are focused and incentivized to create safe, inclusive cultures where everyone can bring their whole selves to the table. They can be fully authentic. They can, you know, raise challenges and put their views across without fear of recrimination or negative consequence. I mean, this pandemic in some ways has created a level playing field between those colleagues who are usually co-located with their manager and those that aren't. But I'm seeing a number of leaders who haven't let go of their need for presenteeism, who are struggling to be able to build trust from afar, you know, across the virtual miles. But in other cases, I'm finding leaders who are really embracing the fact that we're all actually inviting each other into each other's homes right now. So there's an opportunity to create an even more personal social connection that goes a long way to building a deeper level of trust in the team. But like Jacqueline said, I think now there's the shift in leadership has to be to being a more personal, individual conversation, understanding the whole picture of all of the demands on each of your colleagues is really, really key. And having some patience that more time might be needed as those individuals are juggling all of the demands on their time from across home and work, which has now been completely blurred in this pandemic. So, you know, where I've seen that being the shift being successful is where leaders focus on outcomes, not on the input hours, and they focus on building a strong culture of personal accountability in their teams that is focused on those outcomes, irrespective of when they're delivered or how they're delivered.
Yeah, it is happening. And Late last year, I wrote an article for the World Economic Forum, which talked about how 2020 has essentially given rise to the trust economy, and a lot of eyeballs, and sparked a lot of conversations. But naturally, I did not have all the answers for how it plays out in a team that doesn't look like you or doesn't sound like you, right? This is not targeted at any one of you, and maybe all three of you can weigh in at some point, because I personally think that whether it's in politics or in business, leaders over the last 11 odd months, they've been facing a real-time leadership test, right? They've had to learn how to lock down and reopen their businesses while balancing the health of their employees as they do that, right? And I think through this, we've seen a handful of leaders emerge who are now the new face of what competent leadership should look like. So my question is, and pick up whoever would want to go first, could this be that moment in history when we are possibly going to see old, obsolete leadership archetypes sort of being thrown out of the window, and all of us adopting a more balanced perception of leadership? Because that's going to have such a tremendous impact on empathy, on workplace policies, and how we view teams and cultures, right? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to weigh in here, Bianca. Thank you for this question. I think that there will be definitely a shift. Number one, it's just time. But I think in addition to that, there has been a myth dispelled about the way that we've always done things, right? I think a lot of organizations right now, and we'll see it, and I think many of us are already seeing it, are recognizing, oh, we don't need that big office building. We are as productive or even more productive than we were when we had all that real estate. And I think just things like that are making leaders and organizations just redefine or restructure the way that we've done things. Is the way that we've went about leading previously, as it relates to in making sure that everyone is in the office 9 to 5, or for the majority of the time, is that even still necessary? And so, Bianca, I do think that there's going to be a shift in the throwing out of a lot of the older practices, the older expectations around leadership and managing and governing, because we see now that even with a major shift, the huge shift that happened last year with us all working in different places, there was still quite a bit of productivity that happened, and that companies were also able to be highly successful as well. So I do agree with that theory that you have.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, if I can be so bold as to ask you, through this pandemic, as a leader who's left a large organization and then joined a new one, onboarded yourself virtually and met your teams all across the world virtually, as a leader, what have you learned? What have you unlearned?
I've learned that when you show your own vulnerability, when you share how you found the last year challenging and some of the coping mechanisms and support mechanisms you put around yourself, where you've gone to for help, that people really connect with you fast, that they connect with you at a human level, as a peer human to human, rather than being their leader. And that's certainly the way I approach my onboarding to WPP. I've talked a lot about how I've changed my working practices, how I've shifted my work-life balance, some of the changes I've had to make as a family, changes I've made to my physical environment and to the way I look after my own well-being, and what tools and techniques I've used to help when I've gone into a difficult period. So that's been really, really powerful. And I think if you look at the women who are reshaping the concept of modern leadership, what they all have in common is that they make no apology for having an innate human-centeredness, kindness and empathy at the heart of their leadership style. And that actually increases their effectiveness and their outcomes, rather than being a detractor for it. But I think beyond that, it's their innate relatability, that the way they communicate, the clarity they bring to their messages in a way that people can easily connect to, that's being proven as the way that we all actually want to be led today, whether that's a community, a country, or an organization. And I think it's on us as leaders to infuse our own communication styles with those qualities, to make those deeper connections, particularly in a time of crisis.
I love what I'm hearing, but if you can just hold that thought over there, because I do want to bring in Paolo here. And the aspect of accountability, inculcating the spirit of stewardship in not just the top leadership, but also the middle managers, right? People who are actually responsible for the growth of the rest of the organization, encouraging them to do the right thing at the zero moment of truth when nobody is watching, right? To be respectful towards everybody in your team, irrespective of how they look or how they sound. Paolo, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I would like to reconnect with what you guys were saying, in that, the new elements, and they're not new because they've been with us since the the humankind is born. But I'm thinking of the vulnerability, the humility, connected with leadership that you mentioned, and I think it's so powerful when it comes to multicultural teams. Some of the multicultural members coming from different countries and different cultural backgrounds can really benefit from that. I have two questions for you as a leader of teams that you can definitely always use, and with great responses and benefits. And that one is, how can I support you? And the other one is, what am I missing? Because sometimes it's hard to see the whole picture, and sometimes it's very hard to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's coming from a completely different culture. So creating that safe space that you guys mentioned, where they can make mistakes, they can ask a question that perhaps wasn't the right time to ask, and that all really can make a big difference. When it comes to accountability, as you were mentioning, Bianca, I think my suggestion is to think that the many benefits that multicultural teams can bring. Earlier, I was mentioning it is a fact. You can search it on Google and find it in multiple ways. Just multicultural teams are overperforming monocultural teams. So if you're somebody who's looking at bottom line or just very focused on the outcomes, well, keep in mind, maybe with the multicultural team, just the off-start is kind of like uphill, but when it reaches a certain plateau, then you start to see the amazing results. Why? Well, it's very simple. You're bringing different perspectives to the matter at hand. Just when it comes to problem solving, just having all these perspectives can increase the number of solutions, because that's one element of how cultures are different. They go about problems in different ways, and they go about solving them in different ways. And that can be an amazing contribution to the team and the results that you're seeking.
And you talked about solutions, so I want to stay with that because we have about 10 odd minutes before we wrap up the conversation. And I want to be us to be able to leave, sort of actionable items from this conversation. In a way, going back to the point that Rachel was making as well, as Jacqueline, true equality, true sense of belonging really starts from equal pay, right? And I guess that's just a baseline where I start from, but it's not just about equal pay. It's also about resources, right? So I'm thinking protocols for specific minority groups. I'm thinking about employee resource groups that Jacqueline talked about earlier. I'm talking about investment in youth programs, etc. So, or even accessible offices, accessible intranet options, etc. Any thoughts on that? And maybe Jacqueline, Rachel, you might want to weigh in.
Sure. Absolutely. I believe that while I too will second that equal pay, I don't even know why we're still having the conversation, right? I'm not exactly sure why it's still debatable. But what I will say is sometimes, and oftentimes, many times, depending on your personal makeup, what your obligations are as a mom, as a wife, as a grandmother, there are other things that are sometimes even more important than pay. And so I think that having that holistic mindset of, back to Paolo was just saying, how can I support you? And understanding that sometimes for certain individuals, what they need is the ability to leave work 30 minutes early, the ability to have access to professional development opportunities that perhaps in a previous role, they weren't able to have those opportunities. And so holistically asking that question, how can I support you when, maybe compensation isn't something necessarily that can't be addressed for whatever reason? one thing that I definitely want to be able to say when this life is complete for me is that I assisted people with taking action. And so I appreciate leaving a couple of pieces of action if you're someone who really wants to make sure that you are more competent in this subject. And the first thing that I'll offer in this capacity, if you're an entrepreneur, if you are a corporate professional who's rising, is to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I don't want that to be an actionless mantra. What I mean by that is by allowing yourself, by humbling yourself, by being more vulnerable, by giving yourself permission, because all you got to do is give yourself permission to just say, I don't know, right? You put yourself in a position of learning. And when you also buy into this concept of being uncomfortable, or being comfortable being uncomfortable, the next time you have to go through something more difficult, the next time you have to have a conversation with someone about race or gender or titles or something that you did wrong, it'll be a little bit easier, right? Because you've already gone through that uncomfortable part, and now your stamina and your confidence is a bit better. And so I think just this whole idea of just leaning into being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it gets easier, each conversation gets a little bit better. I think that is some action that I would offer to people who are trying to be more competent in this subject and other subjects in their life as well.
Yeah, each of these things you've talked about, right? Focus on similarities and not differences that Paolo talked about earlier. Humility and the need to sort of be more patient. Rachel, any thoughts on that? Any more advice that you'd want to leave people with in terms of how they're actually going to be able to create that environment where people are able to speak up and feel like they're welcomed, irrespective of how they look or what accent they have or who they love or what language they use?
I think the most impactful interventions or programs that I've led around this space have been ones where we've actually consulted with and co-created the solutions with the community we're trying to improve the environment for. At BT, we had the very successful Tech Women program, which was all about improving the visibility, the career mobility, the confidence and the capabilities of our talented women in the organisation. And the reason it was so successful and had such incredible outcomes around retention and around upward movement in career pathways was simply because we ran design thinking sessions with the women in our organisation and asked them specifically what blockers they were facing to those outcomes. And once we understood that and threw away the idea that we knew what the problem was, really deeply listened to what those causes were, we then co-designed with them and with some external partners a set of learning outcomes, mentoring, support wraps around them that delivered on the promise that we developed together. So for me, deep research, co-creation of solutions, and then having strong feedback loops that you constantly iterate as the programs and interventions progress is super important, because conditions change around the group you're trying to create that environment for.
And you talked about outcomes. So I want to get a sense, can employee engagement be a barometer for a sense of belonging within employees? Paolo, you have a thought, and maybe the rest of you can join in as well.
When I think about that, still thinking of how do you go about it in a practical terms, and so I'm thinking like leaders with multicultural teams. For example, one thing that they can do is check. I ask each and every one of them. Check with yourself if your response would have been different if the person you responded to would have been different. So if the person is from a different culture, if the person has a strong accent, if the person it doesn't look like you, is not like you, we should have answered the same way. And this practice of just going through this, playing as a film in your mind, playing as a movie in your mind, would you have said the same things? And it's just a practice of reminding yourself that you need to decline your responses depending on the cultures you're interacting with. The other thing, it's just the question yourself and the ability that you have to bring in different perspectives. I think I think one important actionable item is try to bring in other perspective by asking others. Just let me give you a very simple example. You are going to present for an intercultural audience. Well, send your counterparts. I don't mean the audience, but your counterparts that represent these cultures that you're addressing, your slides in advance and ask them, are they appropriate? Did I choose the right visuals? Am I addressing the differences that there will be in the audience? And they will tell you. They will tell you because, again, nobody really is hesitant in telling you about their own cultures.
Look, to me, it just looks like we all need to be just a good human being, right? A lot of these issues just get resolved. So I know we're up on time, so I want to do 30-second quick closing comments from each of you, just highlights that you want people to take away with. So let me start with you, Rachel.
I think for me, it's about us all taking personal accountability for the type of leadership we want to display and we want to role model for the people in our organizations. So focus on building trust, focus on infusing every conversation with empathy, kindness, patience, and a human centricity. And that will ripple through your organization faster than you might think and help to spark conversations around building more diverse teams and those safe, inclusive cultures that we know will help them thrive.
Jacqueline?
Absolutely. I'll say to consistently remind yourself that in your small corner of the world, in your little pocket of your space, in your office, in your home offices now, probably in your living room, in a small corner of your closet, wherever you're hanging out doing your work, you have the ability to make impact. And I think when we all buy into this concept that we can make change at our level with that one employee, with that one colleague, with that one family member, by changing the narrative, having respectful conversations, it all exponentializes into something much greater and something more productive for us all as we navigate the world. And so just remember that, we all have a responsibility to take action, positive action on making sure that this is a more inclusive and diverse world. And if we do our part, we can have substantial results.
Wonderful. Paolo?
Yeah, well, when interacting with other cultures, when interacting with others different than yourself, again, focus on similarities and not on differences. You will find very powerful elements there that allow you to establish this platform that I mentioned where you feel it's easier to reach out, and the gap you felt originally kind of narrows and becomes insignificant. You can reach out across that and build that platform or relationship and trust that is necessary to thrive for everyone.
Yeah, I'm guessing that, post-COVID, everybody is going to almost, it's guaranteed that everybody is going to sort of value the quality of life very, very differently than we ever have before. So true leadership, trust and openness, walking the talk and not really just, making commitments towards investing in hiring the right people, but also making them feel welcomed and making them grow in the company. That's really important. Thank you all for your time. And it was such a pleasure chatting with you. Yeah. I hope our paths cross again in conversation. And to the audience, thank you for watching. This is just day 3, but an excellent summit is underway, so make sure you make the most of it. And to the Non-Obvious Company team, thank you for inviting all of us. Important discussions all. Thanks for that. Goodbye.